Evening, everyone. ESBR Boxing. Elliot Grigg, obviously back again for another raucous and reliable and enjoyable bit of content for you all here. And I'm joined obviously by my esteemed colleague Danny. It's in many ways the brains of ESPR, the man who knows, the hardcore actually from ESPR, who's the man who brings the theory, the man who brings the knowledge. I'm just here to hopefully try and weave it together. But we're here for another piece of, I suppose, festive content. I suppose is the best way to describe it. Obviously, we've been previewing and reviewing 2022 and 2023. And this is actually a review of 2022, and we're going to focus on upset of the year. And as we have focused on with the other videos, we've obviously done fighter of the year, knockout of the year, etc., etc. We're going to take one British one and one international one. But before we get into it all, I'm going to bounce straight over to you, Danny, and say, how are you, sir? Are you well?
All's good, mate. That was a very flattered intro you gave me. I think a more accurate description would just be the member of ESPR with the most respect. Probably, but no, all's good. Getting all sorted.
Excellent. Well, what we're
Getting
going to do,
sorted for Christmas, I
we had a
think.
very, very brief editorial. I don't want to let you behind the curtain. We had a very, very brief editorial meeting beforehand where we decided the only thing we did decide actually was to start with British and then go with international. So we're going to start with our British upset of the year, and in true, I suppose, courteous style, I'm going to pass you over here, Danny, and say you introduce your fight first, please, and then I'll go second.
No worries. Sort of a tricky one to decide. You sort of rack your brain and you wonder the like any sort of real big obvious ones you're missing. But I'm gonna go with Maxi Hughes beating Kid Galahad. That was September. I think it was the same night as George Parker. It was meant to be obviously Lee Wood Lara. In terms of like odds, you'll probably see bigger upsets, but I think you just have to look at where Maxi Hughes was a couple of years ago and sort of where Kid Galahad was sort of considered. Kid Galahad was considered, potentially up there with the best in his weight class. Obviously, the Maxi Hughes fight was up at lightweight, but just that's really, Maxi Hughes was a sort of British level fighter, sort of Midland British level fighter. He would have been considered, and then had some great wins. The Strathron win, and obviously the Galahad win is another sort of level for me. You got to ask the questions of how much did Galahad have left. Obviously, that horrendous knockout by Kiko Martinez, but you can't use being weight trained as a factor. He was up, 2 weight classes up at lightweight, and from the back of that, you had talk of Maxi Hughes fighting Ryan Garcia, and if it wasn't for sort of how lightweight was just dominated by these like 3 or 4 like superstars, really, then you'd be saying Maxi Hughes is on the verge of a title shot, and I really hope that he gets a big fight anyway, if not a title shot. On the back of that Galahad one, just another sort of couple of ones maybe that sort of crossed the mind. This one was a huge upset if you're going by bookies odds, but just not the profile. It was Sam Maxwell getting knocked out by Alejandro Menendez, I think you pronounce it. I was at that fight, and Sam had just vacated the British title. I think the sort of looming, call to face Dalton Smith was maybe much, and this was for the IBO belt. Seen as maybe an easy touch, but Mexicans coming over here, you're never guaranteed an easy touch. And Menendez punched like a train, and felt bad for Maxwell. It was in Liverpool in front of his own crowd, but I think he was something like 1-40 to win that fight. It was just place just went radio silent. But yeah, to wrap up, Galahad getting sort of Hughes beating Galahad would be mine.
No, that's a great pick. That's a great pick, and I think just for the viewers out there, I think obviously Danny's mentioned he's mentioned IBO belts, he's mentioned being at events, he's mentioned odds. He is the hardcore, and that's the sort of knowledge that he will bring to you. But also, do you think Danny? Because I mean, a lot of people obviously thought that Galahad beat Warrington in that fight that they had as well. Obviously, it was a sort of tough one to judge in many ways, given the styles that they meshed. So actually, from what you're describing, I actually think it's entirely like the position that Maxi Hughes was in going into that Galahad fight. I actually think it was a massive upset, considering, like you said, he wasn't weight trained. He was up there, and you was expecting him to kind of have frankly too much for him. Maxi Hughes, do you see obviously on that kind of obviously that world level now? How far do you see his sort of ceiling being? If I just get a sort of sentence from you there on how far you actually think he can go potentially. I know we're reviewing 2022, but how far to where he can potentially kick on in 2023?
You sort of hesitate to like call a big limit, because if you said this time a year and a half ago, it'd be beating Kid Galahad, that would be seen as ridiculous. And whilst Galahad not got the credentials at lightweight, they had at featherweight still at one point or another a proper world class fighter, and a fighter with a very difficult style to beat. I think once you start looking at the likes of Devin Haney, Gervonta Davis, Tank, and even Ryan Garcia, I think that's maybe a bridge too far. But he's a very, very accomplished boxer, Maxi Hughes, and I think the level below that, there's some interesting fights with him. But as I say, there's just such a big queue for him at lightweight, and for as good as Maxi is, does he have the sort of commercial pull to get that? I'm not sure, but no, he'll feel confident going into any fight, 100%.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Thank you very much for that, Danny. I'm going to go for, well, it's a British fighter, not necessarily an all British fight, but I wanted obviously Cattle Taylor, but that broke our hearts. Still breaks my heart even now. But I'm going to a fight that took place earlier in the year. We're looking now actually at, this was in June, I believe, which was Joe Cordina. It's one of my British upset, essentially, for when he fought Kenichi Ogawa. Now, again, obviously, like Danny was kind of saying, it seems almost weird to say because Cordina's obviously been seen as this prospect, as someone that has obviously this in his locker and has this level in his locker. But I'm coming at it more from just looking at it as where he was in his career at that time. So, I mean, obviously, he was coming into this sort of force. This was his 15th professional fight. Whereas, for Ogawa, he'd been in, obviously, had 26-2-1 record, was older, 34, but had been in, obviously, with Tevin Farmer, Seymour decorated. So it's obviously that aspect, but also the way it happened. I mean, the sense that he got a second round KO, which I don't think. I mean, I was watching it with some of the guys from ESPR as well, and everyone was just sort of like, what? Like, we're all sitting there going on the sort of picks, predictions, betting. Everyone's going, Cordina UD is probably what I fancy here. I think there was a lot of people were sort of backing that, or even people were going for the goal upset. But being in Cardiff, people thinking maybe he gets the UD. But to see that second round KO and that punch that landed was absolutely unbelievable. So the way it happened and the difference in career points at that point is why it was an upset for me, even though it was a hell of a victory for Cordina.
Yeah, 100%, mate. You hit the nail on the head with like the sort of two predictions that was almost all you saw was either Cordina points or Ogawa KO. There was definitely no one screaming out that Cordina was going to stop him, and certainly not in the second round. So yeah, it's outrageous. Like, I think he sort of looks like he's got that bit of power now, and looking forward to seeing that Rakimonov fight in the new year.
No, I think I believe I agree with you, mate, and I think. Sad, obviously, what happened wasn't with Cordina, but obviously getting stripped from the title. But hopefully, he'll come back again. Hopefully, being on for a shot there. But we're going to go obviously from British now to our international upset. And Danny, I'm going to pass the microphone, I suppose metaphorically and digitally, back over to you now to introduce your international fighter upset of the year. Sorry,
I nearly forgot it there. Obviously, sort of like high profile one was Bivol v Canelo, but I think. Looking back, maybe perceptions might have swayed. I know it's easy saying in hindsight, but I think the biggest one for me that I can think of in terms of profile and like when you start factoring odds into it was Kambosos beating Lopez. I remember watching that fight and nearly sure it was the first round. Teofimo Lopez just like charged out like a bull in a china shop. But nailed by a right hand from Kambosos. I mean, I was like 4:30 or 5 in the morning, whatever time it was. And I I was sort of half falling asleep and just sort of shot up and I was sitting there. Got a fight here, and obviously Kambosos blocks brilliantly that night. Not had the same success against Devin Haney, but that was a huge turnover. Like people like Lopez just coming off the beating Lomachenko, like. Whatever way you want to look at it, undisputed, however you factor in that WBC, what was it even called? I can't remember, like the diamond or the platinum or whatever champion it was. He beat the man anyway. He was the consensus number one in the division, and we had saw Kambosos sort of labour past Lee Selby, not too long before that. So no, that for me was, in terms of like how big a fight it was and how shocked I was, I think that's mine by a good bit.
No, that's a huge and correct shout, to be perfectly honest with you. Mine is not as high profile as that. But I was like with you, I was thinking, it's almost like Kambosos was almost overlooked, wasn't he, essentially, by a lot of people going into that fight as well, just going, get this out of the way and then move on to sort of the other big fights in that division. And then to see it kind of happen, obviously, we've talked obviously previously about some of the corner work that night, and generally how things tended to happen. Massive upset actually on the world stage. Mine is not as high profile as a fight of that, but one which when I thought back to it, I thought, again, this is another one where you just go, I did not see this happening. And I'm going to try and talk a little bit around it now and see, hopefully, in your eyes, at what point you realise what I'm talking about. So this is a majority decision victory for a fighter. Congolese Senegalese fighter, which took place in May when he went over to France, and it was the heavyweight division.
Oh yes, great show.
Going over there to get a decision against Yoka. Now, I was stunned to see this. Obviously, Tony Yoka, gold medalist, obviously fought against Joe Joyce in the final. Super heavyweight, that division, I believe it was. But then you're sitting there thinking, obviously decorated. Look at where Joyce is now. You think obviously someone like Yoka should be like banging on that door, going up there as well. But Coley, don't get me wrong, is obviously a tough fighter, hard fighter, big man. But equally, you obviously got that UD victory over Kuzmin, which is decent. But other than that, I mean, most of it was just kind of Billy Nelson talking about how good he was, tended to be basically what was happening with Bakole. So when that kind of went over there, I kind of assumed, yeah, you know, like if he sort of gets it through it, points lost, 10-rounder, UD lost it to Yoka in Paris, perfectly acceptable. And then to come through that not only with a victory, but a points victory in Paris just kind of shows you, I suppose, how dominant he was actually. So for me, that was my upset. Similar to like the one you were describing, one of those moments where you just, and the British ones we were describing earlier, where you're just looking to the sort of person next to you going, what am I witnessing? What am I watching here? But yeah, delighted for him. Delighted for Billy Nelson, but unbelievable evening. Mate,
that is a fantastic shout. Not only like majority decision flatters Tony Yoka so much. I wasn't at the fight at the time. I was at a show, but then watched it back the next day. Fucking Bakole had him down 2 or 3 times and won 9, if not 10 of the rounds. Aside from that, majority of the decision was an absolute disgrace. He beat the, excuse my French, honestly. And it sort of made, I don't get me wrong, I wouldn't go full Billy Nelson on, but it made like half of Bakole and me, because beating Yoka regardless, whilst he's not maybe lived up to his amateur pedigree in the pro show, but the manner in which he did it, the size of him, he's got quick hands, he's powerful, and he gives a lot of heavyweights a very hard time if, you know, he can get the fights, which seems to be the main problem for him. But no, that's a
absolutely show. I was going to ask you that. We'll just touch on that lastly, because that seems to be a long running sort of theme and thread with Bakole, doesn't it? It's almost that sense of who needs it, who needs to fight someone like that. I'm just sort of wondering, like, next year and sort of coming up, you know, he's kind of obviously around that kind of fringe sort of, you know, top 15, top 10 kind of area, where you'd kind of match him, or who you'd kind of match him against, or even if you don't want to sort of say that, like, where do you actually see him at the moment, sort of even fitting into that sort of top 10?
He doesn't. It's so hard to say, because like, why, as good as Yoka is as a win, you have to look at who Yoka's beat and then like how high do you rank it because of that. So it's a really hard one to call. I watched an interview with Billy Nelson like a week, 2 weeks ago, when he was saying that there was like a big announcement for a fight for Bakole coming in the new year. So, you know, hopefully that is, you know, a proper fight. Like, I'd love to see him in with Parker. You know, Billy Nelson's never done banging the drum about how much he's battered Joyce and sparring. He's put up clips of Bakole having success against Joyce and Parker, and you know, that would be the perfect, you know, statement fight to, like, I know Joyce done a really good job in Parker, like first man to ever stop him, but Bakole could go in there and do a better job on Parker than Joyce. You know, you've announced yourself as like a top heavyweight. Feel bad for Parker. He's sort of like just used as like a yardstick. He's a good fighter in his own right, but I just hope he gets the fights, Bakole. He's obviously got that blemish against Michael Hunter. Apparently there was, obviously Michael Hunter, a very good fighter, but apparently there's, you know, sort of external circumstances for that. But no, as I say, that's a brilliant shout.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, man. I think, I'd like to see him in some big fights. I'd like to see him shake up that division a bit as well. But that brings us, I suppose, to the end of our upsets for 2022. Hopefully we witness some upsets, but aren't upset in 2023 by the state of boxing. You guys, as Danny said last time when we had this video, feel free to comment beneath this video. Tell us if we're talking shite. Tell us if you think, you know, you agree with what we're saying. Pat us on the back. You know, give us a thumbs up, whatever. But this obviously fits in with some of the sort of wider content that I alluded to earlier that we're putting on. So obviously we've got other stuff like, you know, fight of the year, knockout of the year, upset of the year, as we've just done. Obviously, performance of the year is the stuff that we've got sort of looking in by way of reflection. But then we've got stuff, you know, by the way of previewing next year. So, you know, what does next year look like for Fury, Canelo, those sort of guys? Fight do you want to see next year? Which Brits do you think might become world champions? So a lot of content coming out of the festive period. Danny, I just want to say again, thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining me. And thank you very much, guys, for watching.